Welcome to July 1863 on Morris Island is entered as evening parade discontinued by written order drums placed in storage and fifers dismissed after dusk. Lantern blink observed from the parapet with an easterly wind pressing smoke. Low rations issued at dusk with canteens filled and several letters left unsealed. Volunteers called for the storming party with names entered in haste and already difficult to decipher. The clerk adds no further remarks as the light fails and the page ends. A subsequent note describes the beach approaches in terms of firm and soft sand with guidance to keep files to the darker stripe, the color detail designated and ammunition checked by weight rather than count watches set by the tide table, and a borrowed chronometer fire opened from the work. Without prelude, at close range, files closed up in silence, and commands passed by touch and repetition. The partial return compiled after midnight remains incomplete at 2 a.m. A family packet preserves a letter that states the eyes will serve for drum and fife if sound fails on the march. The writer keeps step by the measured slap of feet on wet ground and counts intervals when the file ahead disappears. The man in front is known only by the rise and fall of his shoulders and the tension of straps. When flashes cease, there remains breathing and the scrape of leather. The writer cannot say who fell where because smoke made one room of all. A lock of hair is enclosed in case the promise to return cannot be kept. The provisional hospital register records stretcher cases received before dawn at the Sand Battery dressing station, several admitted without company numbers and marked identity. Uncertain pending a return from the field, 2 entries corrected for spelling by a different hand, while a third is struck through without explanation. Causes recorded as shell musketry, exhaustion and immersion. With times approximate disposition ranges across transferred, discharged, and deceased, while effects are not listed. The remarks column stays blank across multiple lines despite space allotted. At Port Hudson, the morning field return lists companies reported to the ditch and held under sustained fire. The engineer states the earthworks intact and the assault repulsed with casualties not fully ascertained at time of writing. Names forwarded as known with several marked not found and inquiry to follow. By courier payrolls delayed pending verification of presence or loss because signatures cannot yet be reconciled. The endorsement reads to be amended when lists arrive from outlying pickets and hospitals. No appended map survives, although pinholes suggest one was once attached. The Vicksburg Sector Engineer Journal measures a corduroy road laid across swamp in rods and partial chains. Teams are passed by night to avoid observation and to keep daylight for excavation and revetting. Guides posted at intervals with spoken distances and no lanterns permitted on the trace wagons, counted by palm on the wheel because visibility is poor and noise must be minimized. The note reads, rain continuous footing, poor 1 axle broken and replaced in the dark. A marginal calculation totals throughput adequate for the next day's issue and ration scale. A coastal parish minute book records an evening meeting during cannonading from the sea with the congregation gathered downstairs. A collection is taken for families of men absent on duty and entered in small amounts without donor names. The clerk writes that names were read from a paper now missing and notes widows present by witness. The bell is rung at irregular hours with cause unspecified, and later testimony associates it with news from the beach. The meeting adjourns without benediction because the room shakes and lamps gutter. The next page begins with expenses for meal candles and cloth. An affidavit enclosed with a pension application states the deponent knew the claimant in the regiment by sight and by a nickname. He cannot attest the exact date of death and believes it occurred in the assault. Described in the regimental return, the signature is made by Mark with a witness present, and the officer certifies on honor. The clerk notes the papers water-stained at the lower edge and corners worn from repeated handling. A second affidavit attempts to reconcile 2 spellings of the surname using a baptism entry and a family Bible. The decision is reserved pending further proof from hospital registers or burial records. A Works Progress Administration interview recorded later states he left with the wagons. When the moon was thin and the timber-wet neighbors claimed the road floated on logs over water and moved like a raft under weight. No letter came to the house, and a story reached the porch by a hired man from upriver. The story changed each winter in small points, but kept his name steady in the first line they sang without instruments. On the night he was remembered and set a chair by the door, the children learned the refrain before they could point to the place on a map. A newspaper retrospective disputes the order of events and the proportion of credit due to the several units at the works. Eyewitnesses quoted in adjacent paragraphs disagree on distance to the salient and the hour of the first volley. Adjectives increase across editions while lists of personal names diminish to initials and ranks. A correction printed a week later amends one initial and withdraws a casualty rumor for lack of confirmation. A portrait is promised in a subsequent number, but does not appear before the printer turns to other matter spaces required for markets, foreign news, and election notices, and the column is discontinued. A consolidated quartermaster record of burials after the campaign lists unknowns interred with others of the line by trench and section regiment. Uncertain is entered where buttons are mixed or uniforms lack distinctive trim. Graves are relocated to a national cemetery and marker numbers assigned in sequence with a typed key. The list is compiled from partial returns and several entries are duplicated with variant spellings and crossouts. A later note admits errors and invites amendments from correspondence with affidavits or photographs. The ledger is closed for the season with totals certified by a contracting officer. A loose memorandum reads the splendid regiment and breaks at an ink spill that dried in a wave across the page. The left margin is torn by an early pin and the right margin scorched by proximity to a lamp or stove. Only a pronoun survives clear across several lines and recurs in later drafts without a proper noun. Between lines appear fingerprints in soot, suggesting hurried handling near fire or powder. No endorsement is attached, and the sender is not indicated or located in other files. The sheet is placed with fragments under a packet labeled Miscellany. A benevolent society roll lists contributions for relief in small amounts beside household marks instead of signatures. The treasurer notes 2 soldiers' families declined meat and requested lamp oil for sewing and watch hours. Minutes seek a teacher to keep a list for those unable to write and to copy letters to absent men. An inquiry is made about men absent beyond term, and no reply is recorded in the following quarter. A visiting committee reports several addresses vacant with shutters closed and a padlock rusted. The book ends with a copied prayer in another hand and an unnumbered blank leaf. A churchyard slate shows initials weathered to shallow cups and dates half visible, aligning with the month of the coastal assault. A mason notes replacement stones ordered with names not certain and requests guidance from the vestry. The parish ledger cross references pew rents, marriages, and burials, yet leaves gaps where families moved. The caretaker lists plots by pacing rather than numbered stakes and admits the old map is presumed lost in a storm. A later survey sketches rectangles by estimation and leaves margins for additions. No photographic record accompanies the sketch and no further corrections appear. A Freedmen's Bureau clerk copies a claim for arrears of pay from a widow who presents 2 witnesses and a marriage line from a register. An officer's certificate affirms service but cannot fix the date or place of death with precision. The office stamps the packet received and defers for further proof, including hospital steamer manifests and cemetery rolls. A marginal hand suggests searching alternative spellings and nicknames across quartermaster ledgers. No reply is entered in the following quarter's docket, and the file remains open to supplement the index later notes, reviewed with no action taken pending documentation. A regimental reunion program lists speakers, songs, and toasts arranged by hour and committee. Several names followed by asterisks indicate deceased but unconfirmed as to date and place. A blank line remains where a portrait should be pasted, and the committee notes the difficulty of obtaining photographs. Minutes resolve to write to distant comrades whose addresses are unknown and to consult newspaper editors. The page closes with a roll call answered by silence and the instruction to try again next year. No subsequent program for that year is preserved and attendance figures are not recorded. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. Include the room and the weather and the word you held. Record the line where a document breaks and you can still follow it, and the line where a name thins to an initial and you still recognize it. If your family keeps a story without a paper to hold it, copy the last version told and the next version you intend to keep. And if a bell rang at no appointed hour, note the hour you remember and the distance to the door. This section establishes where the record comes from, who wrote it when and where it was created, and how it is preserved today. It also raises a small testable question intended to sustain both scholarly and human curiosity without departing from verifiable ground. Language remains neutral and descriptive. Where items fall in the realm of community memory or legend, they are marked as folklore. Time window: January to December 1863, with concentration in May-July 1863. Principal locations: Morris Island and Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, Port Hudson, Louisiana, Vicksburg, Mississippi. Documentary creators: regimental adjutants and clerks, engineer and quartermaster officers, hospital stewards and surgeons, newspaper editors and correspondents, clergy and congregational clerks, federal agents and pension clerks. Post-war works: Progress Administration interviewers, 1930s. Repositories: U.S. National Archives, multiple record groups, Library of Congress, State Archives, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Municipal and Denominational Archives, University, Special Collections, Local Historical Societies and Family Holdings. Origin Daily Returns, morning reports and after-action summaries created in camp on Morris Island during July 1863. Typical creators: Regimental Adjutant Company, First Sergeants, and the Brigade or Division Headquarters staff. Content: head counts, lists of killed, while wounded, missing ammunition, expended, notes on order of attack, and remarks on pay status. Storage: U.S. National Archives, primarily in Adjutant General's office, files commonly cited as Record Group 94 with duplicates and extracts in the published official records. Complementary items in the Massachusetts State Archives for the 54th Massachusetts Muster Rolls pay abstracts and correspondence. Auxiliary materials: personal letters originating from Morris Island, postmarks in July-August 1863 preserved at Massachusetts Historical Society, Harvard, Houghton, Boston Athenaeum, and various local historical societies. Burial registers later consolidated in Quartermaster Records Record Group 92 and, where applicable, National Cemetery ledgers. Identified gaps: inconsistent spelling of surnames across company books and hospital registers. Unknown entries in provisional burial lists. Delays between event and pension evidence. Origin field returns and siege reports compiled by departmental and division headquarters on the Mississippi's lower reaches. Creators: adjutants at brigade and division echelons. Engineers responsible for siege parallels. Surgeons for hospital morning reports. Content: company-level participation, proximity to works, casualty abstracts, and in some cases remarks on performance of the Louisiana Native Guard. Storage: U.S. National Archives in RG 94 and RG 393, records of U.S. Army Continental Commands with state-level corroborants in the Louisiana State Archives and Louisiana State Museum collections. Period newspapers in the Library of Congress chronicling America database maintain parallel narratives, sometimes with conflicting numbers. Identified gaps: partial company lists for specific dates, missing attachments, maps referenced in text but not filed, divergence between manuscript returns and press accounts. Origin engineer journals, bridge and road logs, wagon train tallies, and forage ordnance ledgers created daily along the siege lines. Creators: engineer officers and clerks, quartermasters and transportation officers. Content: footage of Corduroy Road, laid number of wagons passed by hour, work party composition, often listing colored laborers, teamsters, guides, or named companies as they formed, weather notes, damages, and repairs. Storage: U.S. National Archives, RG 77. Office of the Chief of Engineers for Journals and Plans, RG 92 for Transportation and Burial, RG 94 for unit returns that mention detachments. Selected engineer sketch maps held at the Library of Congress Geography and Map Division. Local county minute books and post-war road commissions sometimes echo the same routes. Identified gaps: the same individuals recorded as laborers on one ledger and as enlisted men on another. Missing daily sheets, duplicated names with variant spellings. Origin post and field hospital registers, cemetery plot books, later reinterment tables. Creators: hospital stewards, assistant surgeons, quartermaster, burial details, and later National Cemetery superintendents. Storage: U.S. National Archives, RG 94 and RG 92, National Cemetery registers in VA, NCA custody, selected transcriptions in state historical publications. Identified gaps: transfers recorded without receiving facility, unknown markers later renumbered, mismatched initials across hospital and burial lines. Origin pension and bounty land applications filed by widows, parents, and veterans, affidavits by former officers or comrades, marriage and birth extracts attached as proof. Creators, claimants, and federal pension clerks. Storage: U.S. National Archives, RG 15, records of the Veterans Administration with related correspondence in RG 94. Freedmen's Bureau files, RG 105, contain overlapping service verification rations. contract and schooling notes. Identified gaps, cases held for insufficient proof when spellings or unit designations diverge, missing chaplain or pastor certificates, delayed adjudication. Origin minute books, subscription lists, relief rolls and burial committees, creators, parish clerks, deacons, benevolent society treasurers. Storage congregational repositories including AME, Baptist, and Episcopal archives, diocesan offices, and local historical societies. Some minutes microfilmed or digitized, others retained in paper only. Identified gaps, detached pages, entries without surnames, notations that paper read or names read with the list missing. Plot maps lost in later storms or moves. Origin daily and weekly reporting during the events plus later commemorations. Creators, staff, editors, field correspondents, illustrators. Storage Library of Congress. Chronicling America commercial databases. Microfilm and digital state newspaper projects. Identified gaps, misprints propagated across syndication. Retrospective embellishment. Corrections published days later on different pages. Retracted casualty items. Origin Federal Writers Project field interviews and community oral histories transcribed by local workers. Creators WPA, interviewers and informants. Occasional church or family historians. Storage Library of Congress. American Memory Collection State Humanities Councils and University Folklore Archives. Characteristics names rendered from memory time order approximate rich in detail about roots, sounds, and rituals. Often include motifs of marching without drums, roads built at night, and bells rung without a visible ringer. Limitations not contemporaneous, require triangulation with documentary traces. Note for this corpus, the field worker who recorded this testimony vanished 2 years later on the same road. Dates of creation and dates of filing differ. Regimental and company books were created in camp and forwarded up the chain. Many now survive only as quarterly returns or abstracts. Engineer and quartermaster journals were kept daily. Gaps correspond to days of heavy movement or weather. Hospital registers show later annotations in a second hand. Burial lists compiled weeks or months after the events introduced transcription variability. Pension files can unify names across ledgers, but only when claimants' witnesses and clerks align on spelling and unit. Otherwise, the paper trail remains open or marked insufficient proof. Church and benevolent records provide contemporaneous community impact but frequently omit surnames or rely on identifiers like Widow of Ick without the given name. Across Morris Island, Port Hudson, and Vicksburg, one recurring discrepancy appears a man can be recorded in 1863 as a laborer or teamster on an engineer or quartermaster ledger and later appear in a pension file as an enlisted soldier of a specific regiment for roughly the same month. The discrepancy is not necessarily error. It may indicate a transition stage labor detail preceding formal muster or a soldier detached to fatigue duty. The question to test is straightforward for cases where the same surname and locality appear in A, an engineer quartermaster work ledger, and B, a later pension application. How often can we prove that the entries refer to the same person rather than two individuals with the same name? The test requires triangulation among 1, a locality anchor church, minute book, benevolent roll, or county tax list; 2, an age or physical description from a compiled service record or hospital register; and 3, a witness affidavit naming a company or captain. A pilot sample of 10 names per theater would be sufficient to establish whether the overlap is systematic or incidental. In one coastal parish file, a clerk's marginal note indicates that a bell rang at irregular hours on the night of a major bombardment. No official explanation is attached. A WPA transcript collected in the same county 60-plus years later mentions a night convoy using a floating log road and a missing man remembered by song. The items do not identify the same individual, and the transcript is non-contemporaneous. They do, however, highlight the point where documentary traces thin and community memory supplies continuity. The items are retained here for context only and will not be used as proof without corroboration. U.S. National Archives, RG 94, Adjutant General, RG 92, Quartermaster, RG 77, Engineers, RG 393, Continental Commands, RG 15, Pensions, RG 105. Freedmen's Bureau, Library of Congress, Official Records Sets. Chronicling America Newspapers, American Memory, WPA, State Archives. Massachusetts, 54th Massachusetts Rolls and Correspondence, Louisiana, Port Hudson, Records and Militia National Guard precursors, Mississippi Vicksburg Engineer and County Road Commissions, South Carolina, Coastal Parish, and Municipal Minutes, Denominational and Local AME and Baptist Minute Books, Benevolent Society Ledgers, Cemetery Plot Records, University and Historical Societies, Schomburg Center, Amistad Research Center, Massachusetts, Historical Society, Local County Historical Societies. This establishes origin creators and present custody. The small question above will guide selection in the next section. Identify matched or near-matched names across an engineer or quartermaster ledger, and a later pension case, then test whether the identity is continuous or bifurcated. The aim is limited and concrete. Clarify one mechanism by which a person's trace in 1863 could fragment into multiple labels, and in turn why later remembrance might preserve the person, while the formal record preserves the work. Runaway notices printed in coastal South Carolina papers for June-July 1863 list names, approximate ages, heights, scars, and clothing with rewards offered by planters or factors. Several notices mention departures toward the federal lines or with intent to reach the gunboats. Descriptions repeat keywords such as blacksmith, field hand, boatman, and carpenter, indicating skill as well as status. Dates cluster around days of naval shelling and troop movements on Morris Island. Some notices explicitly warn skippers not to carry fugitives. Others mention family members remaining behind. The pattern suggests movement toward Union positions during the operational window of the Fort Wagner assaults. A coastal parish narrative recorded decades later, folklore recounts a night march with no drum. The sand made its own count. The teller describes a thin bell note heard across the flats when the tide turned. No source for the bell is given. The same account states that footprints filled with water and did not close until morning. The narrative names no regiment, no officer, and no exact date. It preserves an auditory motif, counting without instruments, movement keyed to tide and silence, that corresponds to the conditions implied by the notices. Freedmen's Bureau memoranda from the Charleston District post-1863, but referring to 1863 events, summarize statements by freed people about reaching Union lines by boat at night or by walking the firm edge of beach at low tide. Officers compiling labor rolls for the department records some of these individuals as hired for fatigue duty or as enrolled when regiments of United States colored troops began to form. The memoranda are concise: who arrived under what circumstances and how rations or wages were issued. Names appear with variant spellings across entries. Ages are approximate. The documents corroborate a flow of people into military custody concurrent with the Fort Wagner timeline. A spiritual remembered by a coastal congregation, folklore, compresses direction and purpose into two lines. No drum but the river. No light but the low star. The verses add no place names. A deacon recalling the song explains that it was for walking and not for church shouting, a functional cadence rather than a performance. The lyric survives because it was sung at wakes for men who went by the water and did not come back. The song fixes intent movement towards safety more than identity. Morning reports for the 54th Massachusetts during July 1863 register present, absent, sick on detached duty, and casualties by company. The lines for the days around the assault show spikes in wounded and missing. Hospital registers kept on Morris Island add entries with diagnoses, ball shell exhaustion, and transfer notes to ships or mainland facilities. Where names do not perfectly align, later compilers annotate in a second hand with bracketed corrections. The paper trail, while incomplete, traces bodies through administrative categories and transport nodes. A dream account recorded in a Boston family notebook, folklore, describes a mother seeing her sons stand at the door, wet and quiet, and go past me without a word. The date of the dream is 2 days after the assault. The notebook cites a letter received much later confirming the son's death. The dream cannot serve as proof. It does, however, preserve the household sequence of knowledge: vision first, document second. The affect is contained. The detail, wet clothes, is consistent with coastal operations, but is not evidence of location. Port Hudson returns compiled at brigade-level list, the Louisiana Native Guard participating in specific assaults with company letters and casualty abstracts. Several company-level lists are partial. One names non-commissioned officers lost at a named work. Another leaves a blank where a map reference should be. A court clerk's letter filed months later concerns a witness affidavit to support a widow's claim. It explains that the witness knew the deceased by sight and by the appellation Henry, but could not confirm the spelling of the surname. The file is marked awaiting further evidence. The case illustrates how recognition fractures when paperwork is interrupted by combat and illiteracy. A Port Hudson ghost story folklore refers to a stretch of ditch where lanterns do not hold their light. The teller says that men going off watch would hear steps approach in mud and then stop beside them, but with no breath. The narrative lacks names and ranks. It serves to identify a location of fear and repetition. Steps ditch lantern that parallels the bureaucratic phrase held at the ditch which appears in the returns. The folklore assigns agency to the site. The paperwork assigns function. Vicksburg engineer journals record daily roadage of corduroy road laid through swamp number of wagon crossings and work party composition soldiers on fatigue, hired laborers, teamsters, and guides. On several days, the same surname appears both on an engineer work list and on a regimental detail sheet. In one county after the war, a Freedmen's Bureau register captures that surname again in a claim for arrears due for work performed for the Army 1863. This overlapping suggests either the same person moving between categories or two people of the same name working in adjacent capacities. The ambiguity is methodological names without stable identifiers migrate across ledgers, complicating later verification. A backcountry superstition, folklore, states that a road built on logs will remember the feet that taught it to float and that at certain nights wagons can be heard without mules. The saying is attached to a place near a creek crossing described in county tradition as the soldier's path. It neither dates the path nor identifies service branches. It preserves practical knowledge floating roads' night passage and fuses it with an acoustic claim. The superstition echoes the journal's technical entries while refusing their numbers. A set of runaway ads from Mississippi newspapers in May-June 1863 describes men leaving plantations with a pass forged or taken with a small boat or in company of two others. One ad mentions a scar on the left wrist from an axe, which matches a later pension affidavit for a man of the same given name, stating a scar in that location, though the surname differs by a vowel. The pension file otherwise aligns in age and county. The correlation is unproven but guides a structured search assemble all instances of that given name in county-level records, compare physical marks, and test for convergence. A family song refrain, folklore, is recalled in a WPA transcript left on a night boat right on a road of wood sung with alternating steps. The informant cannot place the origin. The refrain transmits a technique: boat first, road second, and a rhythm. It likely functioned as a teaching aid or a commemoration. The refrain does not supply identity, it keeps a method alive. Court correspondence from a South Carolina parish in late 1863 includes a letter from a vestry clerk confirming that a bell was rung at irregular hours during a coastal bombardment, and that a collection was taken for families whose men were absent with the Army. The clerk names 3 households, but not the men. Church minute books add expenses for meal candles and cloth following the same nights. These entries anchor community impact to specific dates that can be matched to military logs. An oral testimony folklore attributes the same bell to a deacon who could hear the ships from inside his sleep. The detail is non-verifiable. It personifies vigilance as a gift. The testimony helps explain why the bell is remembered without a ringer in other accounts. It is preserved because it assigns a human source to a repeated sound when the written record remains impersonal. Unit rolls for the 54th Massachusetts show several men listed missing on assault night, and later amended to killed in action with hospital or burial notations added months later. Quartermaster burial tables compiled after reinterment record unknown interments in national cemeteries with marker numbers replacing names. Pension files from the 1870s include widows and parents seeking verification. Success depends on affidavits from officers or comrades, chaplain marriage certificates, or hospital admissions that match even a partial name. The process is uneven. Some claims close with payment, others remain open or are denied for lack of proof. A Charleston area legend, folklore, holds that those who went in the smoke answer by footsteps when the tide turns. The legend dictates a test stand at a certain bend in the marsh at low water and count without counting, letting the mud make the number. The practice confers no information to a historian. It shows how a community framed disappearance not as silence but as a transferable cadence. A small bundle of letters preserved by a Massachusetts family begins with enthusiasm about equal pay and drill and ends with practical requests for socks and stamps. The final letter in July contains no combat description, only a line that the writer is busy with orders. The envelope is postmarked, the hand is steady. The next paper in the bundle is a church program listing the writer's name under remembered. This juxtaposition letter and program marks the shift from participant to subject. The documents confirm the social mechanism by which absence enters the record. A closing fragment in the county notebook, folklore, states that a field worker who took down testimony about the night road vanished 2 years later on the same road. The notebook offers no date and cites no coroner or sheriff. The note likely functions as a cautionary device attached to a route that remained dangerous. Kept in the file with other testimonies, it signals the convergence point of record and myth, a named worker, a place, and an unverifiable fate that nonetheless maintains the road's reputation. The Song of Truths for 1863 therefore alternates between terse entries, names, dates, payrolls, rods of road company letters, hospital diagnoses, and remembered patterns, steps without drums floating, roads, bells without ringers, and visions that reached a door before the letter did. The two layers intersect without fusing. Where a runaway ad cites a skill, a spiritual encodes a route. Where a return lists, held at the ditch, a ghost story locates lanterns that fail. Where a pension clerk waits for proof, a dream report testifies to arrival and departure in a household ledger. The historian's task in the next section is to test one narrow question within that alternation in cases where the same name appears in an engineer ledger and a later pension file. Can the identity be fixed, or does the documentary rhythm split one life into parallel lines that never fully rejoin? No survivors were found. Oral record. But the drums still answered that night. The return closes the column with a total and a period. The church minute lists names read aloud and then trails to and others. Both papers carry the same date. Neither explains the sound the deacon noted between volleys. The figures are final on one page and unfinished on the other. Approach by the left, fire heavy. Unit withdrew at 02:10. Oral record. Footsteps kept time after the shouting stopped. The staff officer fixes distance by paced yards and records no names. The singer keeps count by breath and does not mention yards. The document binds action to a clock. The verse binds action to a cadence without a clock. Held at the ditch. Oral record lanterns would not hold their light at that ditch. One line assigns a function to a position in the works. The other claims the place itself altered tools. The map uses hachures and labels. The story uses a failure of flame. Both point to the same soil seen at night and at day. The next line is missing. Only one word remains returned. The docket number is legible. The enclosure reference is present. The sheet that should hold the statement is absent. A clerk's pencil asks for copy to follow. No copy follows. The gap is preserved as part of the file. Name unknown effects, none. Oral record. His mother heard the bell and set a chair by the door. The burial ledger assigns a marker number in a row. The family ledger assigns a chair in a room. One entry is verified by a superintendent's signature. The other is witnessed by neighbors' names. Both entries accept an absence and try to name it. Pay suspended pending verification. Oral record. He signed with an X and then he left. The office requires a second affidavit with a fixed spelling. The neighbor repeats the same 2 syllables and points to the scar on the left wrist. The clerk stamps insufficient proof. The porch carries the proof in a remembered hand. Boat movements unrecorded due to weather. Oral record. The river kept the count. The log leaves the hour blank and notes fog. The refrain supplies a sequence without hours. The quartermaster seeks tonnage and draft. The singer supplies strokes and silence. The crossing occurred. The instruments disagree on how to state it. The next line is missing. Only one word remains widow. No address is written. No parish is named. A pencil mark adds a question sign. Later pages search for the surname in 2 spellings. The search stops with an empty envelope wrapper. The wrapper is filed with the case. Color bearer fallen. Colors recovered by detail. Oral record. A flag went by in smoke and then by again. The report compresses 2 actions into a single clause. The witness separates them into a first sighting and a second. The return is a summary. The sentence is a sequence. The difference is not reconciled in writing. Casualty rumor withdrawn. Oral record. We said his name at every harvest. The newspaper prints one correction line and moves to other matter. The field repeats a name in a fixed place each year. The column marks a retreat from an error. The right marks refusal to forget. Both act on the same person from different rooms. Detachment to fatigue duty. 20 men, no names listed. Oral record. The road floated on logs. The men knew where to place their feet. The engineer adds rods of corduroy and totals wagons past. The telling adds knowledge of balance taught at night. The ledger shows throughput adequate for the next issue. The sentence shows method without numbers. The next line is missing. Only one word remains, seen. There is no verb and no place name. The ink grows lighter toward the margin. A pinhole implies a sheet once attached. A note below reads, see also with nothing to see. The folder closes on a fragment. Prisoners not taken. Oral record. Someone knocked twice and no one opened. The engagement summary states a negative and ends. The porch story states a negative and continues. The official line satisfies a category. The house line preserves a sound that matches no category. Both record the same night from unlike thresholds. Transferred to hospital steamer. Destination illegible. Oral record. She dreamed his clothes were wet. The steward's ink has run in water. The notebook keeps the adjective and omits the place. The transport existed and cannot be followed. The dream existed and cannot be used as proof. Both remain in the packet. Witness unable to supply surname spelling. Claim held. Oral record. He was always Henry. Nothing more was needed. The caseworker searches for letters in a fixed order. The household needs only the first name and a scar to distinguish him. The file waits on a chaplain's certificate. The kitchen waits on a knock that does not come. Unknown interred. Regiment uncertain. Oral record. He marched in a regiment. The name is not here. A trench becomes a numbered plan. A march becomes a refrain. The superintendent assigns a lot. The congregation assigns a path between stones. Neither system supplies the missing letters. The next line is missing. Only one word remains, again. No date precedes it. The clerk's hand changes on the next sheet. A memorandum references a map attachment. The attachment is not in the folder. The folder keeps the reference as an object. Disbursement to families recorded in shillings and cents. Oral record oil was asked instead of meat. The treasurer totals currency by column. The minute adds the choice of lamp fuel over food. The entry closes with a sum. The note opens a picture of work done at night. Both point to relief and the form it took. Appeal denied for insufficient proof. Oral record. The proof was the seat left empty. The decision is typed and initialed. The absence is neither typed nor initialed. The paper binds a policy to a page. The room binds memory to a chair. The man remains between them. Company book lost in movement. Oral record. The old men kept a roll by memory. The loss is attributed to weather and transport. The substitute is attributed to recall and repetition. The book will not be found. The list will not be canonized. Both will be used in their own spheres. Map attachment missing. Oral record. The crossing is where the frogs begin. The office looks for lines and a legend. The field uses a sound to fix a point. The request for map on blue paper repeats in later letters. The path is still passed by a phrase. Neither cancels the other. The next line is missing. Only one word remains north. The corner note says, see also, and ends. A cataloger adds a modern slip with a barcode. The slip does not restore the page. The direction remains without a subject. Assault repulsed, earthworks intact, oral record. The ground took and held their weight. The assessment stays with the structure and its state. The sentence stays with bodies and pressure. The file moves to the next operation. The sentence stays at the same parapet. The 2 pages will not meet again. Morning and evening reports disagree on totals. Oral record. We counted by chairs, not by names. The numbers differ by a small margin on the same day. The head count in the room sets 1 chair for 1 person missing. The staff reconciles the sum next week. The room keeps the chair until it wears. Soldier listed as missing, later amended to killed in action. Oral record. He went into the smoke. He did not come back with the tide. The amendment fixes a category and a date. The statement fixes a movement and a cycle. The record closes the line. The sentence keeps a motion. The next line is missing. Only one word remains, brother. A lower note asks which with an arrow to a blank. Later correspondence seeks a parish and a mother's name. The reply is not in this folder. The folder holds the question. Guide employed at customary rate. Oral record. He knew the path before it had a name. The ledger ties guidance to miles and days. The tale ties it to prior use and habit. The rate is clear. The route is older than the rate. Both statements stand without reconciliation. County and state migration maps compiled between 1865 and 1877 show streams leading from river parishes and coastal islands toward railheads, contraband camps, and federal posts. Arrows and thickened lines indicate volume. Marginal notes cite months when crossings peaked. The legend attributes sources to tax rolls, Freedmen's Bureau transportation vouchers, and parish registers that record departures. In the same counties, congregational notebooks list processions on particular Sundays when families moved out with short lines noting the hymn selected and the distance estimated to the next church. The pages do not draw arrows. They mark a route by hymn number. Reconstruction testimony includes deponents stating their movement from the plantation to the military road on a date naming a known officer or agent who issued a pass. Sworn statements are witnessed by clerks. Spelling is corrected in brackets. The benediction formula written at the bottom of community pages repeats keep and carry in phrases used at send-offs. The repetition functions as a verbal pass without seal. The two forms affidavit and blessing name transit with different authorities. A soldier's letter describes boredom drill concern over pay, and finally an assignment to fatigue duty repairing a road cut by rain. The letter adds a line about a comrade gone missing after the night work. The envelope bears a date and location. A family entry in a household notebook notes a sitting up that same week, not a funeral, but a vigil with two names written at the top and one cross drawn near the margin. There is no death stated, only a time kept. Press columns identify outcomes at Charleston, Port Hudson, and Vicksburg, sometimes listing unit names and sometimes omitting. Corrections appear days later. The columns use the language of totals and consequences and alternate between commendation and criticism. Meeting minutes at benevolent societies list small disbursements for lamp oil cloth and meal with notations for those waiting on word. A slate of visiting pairs is assigned by handshake. Both pages address consequence. Only one uses printed emphasis. A quartermaster route sheet lists distances between depots in miles and hours, with remarks about creeks, bridges, and floating road segments. Several names recur as teamsters or guides and then disappear from later sheets. A spiritual carried across congregations uses a call and response, left by the water, right by the wood, with the leader naming landmarks and the group repeating the verb. The song does not name the persons. It remembers the step. In a reconstruction file, two witnesses attest that Henry, surname uncertain, served as a guide on a specific night and did not return. The clerk asks for a chaplain's certificate to confirm a marriage before benefits can be dispersed. The same household's church book records a wake held without the body, the seats placed in a square, and the same first name said in rotation. The absence becomes a format. The file waits for paper. The room waits with chairs. A migration map's legend assigns symbols for free labor contract school, established dispute adjudicated, and violence reported. The lines crossing marshes rely on engineer surveys and ferries noted in military logs. Field instructions preserved in oral form identify a crossing as where the frogs begin or where the mud changes sound. The mnemonic does not translate into a scale, but locates a point reliably for those who walk it. The two locators work in separate systems. Cemetery reinterment tables rename plots with numbers. Several entries read unknown with regiment uncertain. Transfer notes say from trench to section with dates of movement and superintendent initials. Families continue to walk to a customary point near a tree or wall where the earlier graves were bringing names that do not match the numbers. The practice is consistent across years. The table records relocation. The path preserves the first map. Engineer and quartermaster labor rolls list colored laborers, teamsters, and guides with daily rates, deductions for lost tools, and notes on illness. Some surnames appear on both rolls and regimental details in the same week. A work song remembered with steady tempo has lines about laying wood in water and feeling the wagon, with a refrain used to pace lifting. The refrain holds technique. It is not a signature, but it sustains a function that the roll only totals. Families file petitions for arrears of pay, naming a man and a unit if known, describing scars and stature and affixing marks. Decisions note insufficient proof where spellings diverge or no chaplain certificate exists. A ritual appears in the household ledger, a basin placed by a door on an anniversary date, a chair turned toward open air, and a single candle kept. The notations are short and do not add interpretation. Petition and ritual both formalize absence. A clerk's margin reads map on blue paper missing, and a second hand adds seek copy from district. The request remains unanswered in the folder. A deacon writes in a church book margin bell rung at no appointed hour and adds a line naming no ringer. Both margins preserve a lack, one of paper, one of person. Each marks a point others recall without filling in. Early Reconstruction school lists include names of children by household ages and attendance with a column for fathers absent or unknown. The column remains partially filled in some counties for years. A song list in the same church records titles used in wakes and send-offs. 2 songs recur in months that match peaks in the migration map. The pairing implies rhythm and departure but does not supply purpose. Attendance and repertoire mirror each other as traces. A county court minute states that a bridge was repaired by contract and that road funds were dispersed. The note references work done for the Army in 1863 by unnamed men whose heirs now petition. A household ledger dates sitting up nights by season and weather, not by cause. In the months when the court mentions funds, the ledger shows increased nights kept. The cross-reference suggests an indirect link, repair and remembrance occurring together. A retrospective newspaper profile praises the 54th Massachusetts and summarizes at length, citing officers by name and describing the assault in general terms. The article contains 2 initials corrected a week later. A family manuscript copies the name of one enlisted man, repeatedly filling a page as practice and as insistence. The script varies, the letters stabilize. The printed profile lifts narratives into a broader audience. The copied name keeps one person specific. A soldier's letter states assignment to fatigue work and a plan for equal pay to be honored, subject to future act. The next letter is brief and contains a note about watches set to tide. No further letters follow. A ritual in a congregation sets watches to tide for a hymn, the timing marked by hands rather than by clocks. The similarity of timing is noticed but not explained in either place. The line between assignment and posture is a shared habit. A ledger entry reads, "Guide employed at customary rate naming miles and days." The guide's surname appears only once. An oral testimony states he knew the way before it had a name. The rate of pay is a number, the rate of recall is a sentence. Both are specific, neither binds the other. A unit return lists present and absent by company with column totals. The sheet is forwarded to higher command. A house roll lists names present at a vigil with a small cross marking the absent. The sheet is kept in a drawer. The ink in both has faded similarly. The uses are different. A correction line in a newspaper withdraws a casualty report and amends an initial. The line is one sentence and appears below advertisements. A refrain in a song does not amend anything. It repeats as designed. Both acknowledge error indirectly, one by removal, the other by maintenance of tempo. Oaths filed by men taking positions under Reconstruction list names and allegiances and promise to uphold statutes. Some signatures are by mark. Ritual phrases used at leave-taking in congregations promise to carry and keep without citing statutes. The phrases have witnesses. The oath and the phrase create public statements. One is for office, one for passage. Teachers' monthly reports to the Bureau mention attendance and obstacles, including harvest weather and absence owing to removal. A mother's note in a household book writes, "He went where the road floats without date." The teacher and the mother record absence with different causes. Neither supplies a destination. A reinterment notice assigns a new section and marker number and lists the old location as trench near works. An anniversary entry notes a walk to the place we first stood, naming a tree that is no longer on official plans. The notice and the entry reference the same ground by different systems. Labor contracts arranged under Bureau supervision list wages, terms, and penalties for breach. Many specify no work on Sundays and rations by the employer. Candle marks in a church ledger show that Sundays also hosted the longest songs, with 2 candles burned low at the back page. Contract time and song time run alongside each other in the same week. A pension denial letter cites insufficient evidence linking a man's labor on an engineer road to a specific regiment at a specific date. It invites further proof. A kept chair at a doorway is annotated annually with initials done in pencil by different hands. The letter reaches a result in law, the chair reaches a result in practice. Both mark a boundary between a person and a file. When the migration map is overlaid with school openings and church minutes, clusters appear at places where rivers meet roads and where federal depots stood. The clusters show a pattern of approach and departure that can be counted. The motif across spirituals and wake records is steady leaving at night, counting by step bells rung without an appointed hour, and clothing described as wet in dreams. The motifs cannot be counted with confidence, but they recur where the clusters do. Each side reflects the other. The map points to the crossings. The songs mark the same crossings with verbs. A set of affidavits, a corrected initial, a reinterment table, A school list and a road ledger can assemble one possible path for a man from plantation to camp to work detail to trench to a number. The chain is uneven, but it holds enough links to pass from inquiry to tentative identification. A refrain, a chair, a basin, a vigil, a bell, and a sentence in a margin can assemble the same path in household terms: departure, labor, absence, commemoration without numbers. The chain is also uneven, but it holds enough pieces to pass from mourning to practice. What proof permits a name to pass from ledger to stone? What practice permits a name to persist when proof does not arrive? The two lines document and ritual now face each other. Each supplies what the other leaves open. Neither cancels the other. The intersection point is not a scene. It is a pattern roots traced in ink that match roots carried in song numbers that sit beside chairs, a corrected initial that meets a fixed first name in the same week. The reflecting line is where the historian can stand without choosing between them, and where a community has already stood, counting by both map and measure and by step and sound. The file for Morris Island ends with a clerk's hand that grows lighter toward the margin and stops after the note return incomplete at 2 o'clock. No supplement follows in the packet. The regiment's next complete return resumes the routine categories present, absent, sick, without a sentence about the night in between. The silence is not an omission corrected later. It is the final state of the page. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. A Port Hudson morning report lists held at the ditch gives a figure and moves on to rations issued. A blank meant for a map reference remains blank in the bound volume. A later indexer adds a cross-reference that points to a folder with no map. The parish minutes for the same week record a collection for families awaiting word, then a line that the bell was rung at no appointed hour. No official note explains the bell. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. In the Vicksburg Engineer Journal, the last entry for a particular road reads "throughput adequate for tomorrow's issue," followed by a calculation in the margin. The next sheet is present, but the hand has changed the names of guides and teamsters. Stop repeating, and a short note states details reassigned. The labor roll for the same day lists a surname once and then not again. There is no memorandum consolidating individuals, only totals. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. A pension file closes with claim denied for insufficient proof, a typed line, initials, and a date. On the reverse of the denial is a faint pencil mark, 2 letters that could be the start of a surname or the remains of a calculation, and then nothing. The household ledger in the same family continues yearly with the same chair placed and the same initial penciled by different hands. The administrative line is final. The domestic line repeats. No one wrote again, but the dream kept answering. Newspaper columns that carried corrections and profiles cease to mention several names after the correction cycle ends. A promise of a portrait does not appear. The space fills with markets, foreign news, and election notices. When the paper's bound volume is indexed decades later, the index includes the unit and the battle, but not the promised name. In a notebook kept in a different house, a single page is filled with one name handwritten in rows as if copied for practice. The copying stops without a note. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. A county migration map drawn in Reconstruction shows arrows flattening into thinner lines as departures slow. The legend cites vouchers, oaths, and contracts. At the edge of the sheet, a small mark notes road lost in flood with a year. In a congregational record, the hymn used for send-offs reappears for a different purpose, a harvest service with the same refrain. The change is not explained. The hymn's function drifts while the map's line ends. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. A churchyard slate protects initials that weather into shallow cups. Replacement stones are ordered. A mason's note says names not certain. The cemetery superintendent's reinterment table substitutes numbers for previous rows. Families continue to walk to the old place and call names that do not match the assignments. There is no reconciliation document between number and name in the file. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. A Works Progress Administration transcript contains a final paragraph in which the informant says, "He left with the wagons when the moon was thin," followed by a line that is all I will say. The field worker adds no comment and dates the page. The same file includes a marginal note in a different hand. The field worker who recorded this testimony vanished 2 years later on the same road. There is no corroborating report in the folder. The human trace ends in 2 sentences, one spoken, one marginal. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. A unit return amends missing to killed in action, and a burial ledger later marks unknown at a national cemetery. The pension case remains unresolved because there is no chaplain's certificate. The church minute for the family's parish lists a vigil without a body and does not add a later funeral entry. None of the documents contradict each other. They also do not complete one another. The pattern holds: a category closes, a number replaces a name, a rite repeats. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. An engineer's guide employed at customary rate line is the last appearance of a name. In the county road record a year later, a brief note reads, "Bridge repaired by contract with no laborers named." A local oral testimony states, "He knew the path before it had a name." Between the ledgers and the sentence is only proximity in place. There is no connecting file. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. A teacher's report to the Bureau lists absences owing to removal. The next month shows fewer absences and a note that harvest is complete. The household ledger for a family in the same district includes a notation: "Sitting up not kept this year." The remark carries no reason and no signature. The absence of the ritual is its own record. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. A reunion program prints speakers and songs. Asterisks mark deceased unconfirmed. A blank space for a photograph remains a blank. The committee resolves to write to distant comrades. The minutes end with the line, "Try again next year." The following year's program is not preserved. In a different folder, a loose memorandum reads, "The Splendid Regiment," and breaks under an ink spill. Neither paper advances. Both arrest attention with half forms. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. A quartermaster ledger notes mules lost in storm, and a transportation tally declines for 3 days. A local saying persists: "The wagons were heard without animals." The saying is not placed under oath. It does not try. The ledger recovers by numbers. The saying recovers by claim. Neither erases the other. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. A court minute endorses appeal denied for insufficient proof, and the clerk enters a check mark next to the docket. The widow's address line is blank. The next quarter's docket does not revisit the case. In a family book, initials appear each year in pencil next to a date with no other text. There is no hand to settle the difference. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. A deacon's note in a church book margin: "Bell rung at no appointed hour," is the last mention of the bell in the record. The note is not explained, not repeated. The absence of explanation becomes the durable feature. In a WPA transcript from the same county, a closing line says, "We counted by the feet, not by the clock." The crossing between the two statements is a shared refusal to use the expected measure. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. A final constellation occurs when migration arrows on a map align with the dates of school openings and the peaks of benevolent distributions. The overlay is a technical outcome, not a narrative. The spirituals reported across the same counties concentrate motifs: leaving at night, counting by steps, bells heard without a ringer, and dreams of wet clothing seen at a doorway. The motifs do not add dates, but they cluster where the arrows meet. The mirror holds on one surface lines and legends, on the other refrains and practices. No one wrote again, but the dream kept answering. When the official records volume that contains the Fort Wagner summaries is closed on a table, the spine holds. The pages in community minute books that face the same period have loosened in their bindings. A reconciliation does not exist in the form of a final report. The closest tool is repetition chairs: set bells rung, names copied, hymns chosen, steps counted. The archive cannot sound these acts. It can only list their correlates when it has them. The households cannot issue certificates. They can only continue the acts. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. At the edge of several folders are small slips added by later catalogers with barcodes and standardized terms. The slips bring order and access. They do not fill missing lines. The broken record moments remain as they were: returned, widow, seen, again, north. No annotations change their force. The strength of the silence is that it cannot be moved. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. A last oral line appears in one county notebook where the informant asked for dates. Answers: count the low bell when it comes from the ground. The line has no location and no method that a clerk could accept. It preserves an action, not a fact. The file ends. The act repeats elsewhere with other hands, other bells, other chairs. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. The closing items in the packet's denials, blanks, resumed routine totals. do not reduce the work performed or the movement achieved. They only stop naming. The community forms held afterward, vigils, refrains, processions, do not change outcomes. They keep naming without paper. On the ledger side, numbers, rods of road allotments, markers. On the household side, chairs, songs, watches, initials. The point where they meet is not a signature. It is a pattern of answering without a reply. No one wrote again, but the dream kept answering. The present inventory stands on the work of multiple finders and custodians. Unit returns and casualty abstracts for the 54th Massachusetts and associated commands are located in federal holdings with standard call numbers. The copies used here reside in the U.S. National Archives, among adjutant general records and related printed volumes in major research libraries. Engineer journals, road ledgers, and transportation tallies for the Vicksburg sector are preserved in the Federal Engineers Record Group with select sketch maps duplicated in the National Map Division. Quartermaster burial and reinterment tables survive in Transportation and Burial Series and are cross-listed with the National Cemetery Register. Parish minute books, benevolent rolls, and churchyard records are dispersed. Some are held by denominational archives with accession logs. Others remain in county historical societies or in congregational safekeeping without standardized cataloging. Pension and bounty files are maintained under federal veterans' records. The case dockets consulted include approvals, denials, and files marked insufficient proof, each with the expected layers of affidavits and clerk annotations. Works progress administration interviews are held in digitized form and in paper transcripts in library collections. Several county oral history notebooks remain only on paper with minimal metadata. The materials are available because archivists boxed, labeled, microfilmed, digitized, described, and retrieved them. The scope of what we can recite today reflects their work. Several facts remain stable under cross-check. The 1863 timelines at Charleston, Port Hudson, and Vicksburg are fixed by official correspondence, movement orders, and newspapers with dates. The presence of black soldiers and black military laborers is visible in returns, ledgers, and payrolls, even where naming is incomplete. The administrative pipeline from combat record to hospital admission to burial or reinterment is uneven but traceable in form. Post-war claims demonstrate both the intent and the limits of federal recognition when spellings, chaplain certificates, or unit identifiers do not align. Community records show direct impact collections for families, vigils without bodies, walks to older grave places after reinterment change the surface. These points do not rely on conjecture. They recur across repositories. Several items remain unclear. For a subset of names that appear as laborers or guides in engineer or quartermaster ledgers and later as enlisted soldiers in pension files, the identity match cannot be confirmed without a chain of identifiers that the records do not provide. For burial entries marked unknown, the conversion to named graves is incomplete and probably will remain so where battlefield and reinterment conditions erased markers. For promised portraits and press profiles, the run of the periodical fails to deliver the specific image, and no private collection has yet supplied it. For parish map attachments referenced in minutes, the sheets are absent. Pinholes and marginal notes are the only trace. For the WPA note that a field worker vanished, the county file carries the statement without corroborating documentation. Without external confirmation, it stands as a bracketed remark about risk on a dangerous road, not as a documented fate. The rest is not speculation here. It is a list of what is known. The current state of access is mixed. Digital surrogates for major federal series allow wide consultation but cannot substitute for marginalia paper color and sequence clues visible in boxes. Congregational records remain unevenly described and sometimes restricted to local readers. Family bundles are available only when descendants volunteer them. The labor of indexing under variant spellings remains ongoing. For several counties, compiled service records and local tax lists still require manual comparison. The result is a patchwork in which national-level movements are crisp and local names are granular but broken. The echo motif that has carried through this reading persists without embellishment. In the files that end with routine totals and silence, the drums still answer in the form of steps recorded implicitly, fatigue details assigned, miles of road-laid issue throughput met. In places where boat logs leave blanks for hours because of fog or weather, the river still answers in other documents that show arrivals rations or the next day's work moving forward. In parish margins that record a bell rung at no appointed hour without explanation, the bell still answers in subsequent minutes that show gatherings, collections, and longer songs. In households where letters cease and dockets close with insufficient proof, the dream still answers as an annual notation. A chair kept an initial penciled, a date remembered, transmitting intention when legal closure does not. We can say who found the records and where they are stored. We can specify what remains unclear and how the gaps arise. We cannot force a merger between systems that were never designed to meet. The official record was created to total movement material and men under command. It succeeds at scale and fails at the edges where identity was fragile. The community record was created to keep households coherent under loss. It succeeds at the edge and does not claim to handle totals. When the two face each other, neither cancels the other. The ledger line stating held at the ditch and the oral line stating lanterns would not hold their light describe the same place by different authorities. The reinterment number and the path to the old tree both locate a grave practice. The correction line and the repeated first name both address error by different means. One retracts, the other insists. The overlap is not a scene. It is a pattern that has already been lived and is now legible because repositories keep both. Responsibility in the present tense consists of 3 actions and 1 restraint to cite where the papers are, to describe what they say and do not say, to preserve the community pages and practices with equal clarity, and to refuse the temptation to fill missing lines with imagined continuity. The echo motif assists that restraint. Where a page ends, the drums answer by step counts embedded in other ledgers. Where a log leaves a blank, the river answers by the existence of the next day's issue. Where a margin names a bell without a ringer, the bell answers by events that follow. Where a docket denies a claim for lack of proof, the dream answers by the persistence of annual practice. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. No one wrote again, but the river kept answering. No one wrote again, but the bell kept answering. No one wrote again, but the dream kept answering. The inversion now states itself without emphasis and without metaphor. The files do not prove that the men disappeared. They prove that the categories did not always capture them. The community pages do not prove that the state was indifferent. They prove that households held names through means the state did not recognize. The disappearance in this framing is not theirs. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe we did. A closing sentence for the subject follows in the same register as the rest. History is the sum of what survives, but memory is the shape of what communities refuse to let end. A responsible reading keeps both in view, accepts the silences that remain, and counts the work even when the names do not return.